Pete Moore on Halo Talks NYC. I have the pleasure of having Rina Raphael. She is a health, wellness, tech, and women's issues expert. She started at Fast Company, has written for the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, CBS, NBC News, and has a newsletter, Well To Do, and is the author of Gospel of Wellness. We're going to be allowed to use the word wellness throughout this podcast, and we're going to flip it into Halo, and we're going to talk about where she sees the industry going. So, Rina, thanks for coming on the show.
Excited to chat with you guys.
Awesome. So, you started in this industry kind of at the, as a pioneer or an evangelist, and you talk a little bit in your book about having conversations and interviews with Gwyneth Paltrow and, David Asprey, and they were obviously on the precipice of, new technologies and biohacking. So talk about how you made this a career and, some of the things that you've kind of been able to diagnose and kind of unpackage it and repackage for everyone.
Yeah. So I essentially was working at Fast Company magazine. I was a reporter, mainly doing lifestyle reporting. And I moved to LA, particularly because I was really wellness or Halo obsessed. And I just thought it was a healthier lifestyle. And more, my pitches started to sort of reflect my interests until I became a full-time wellness industry reporter. I think I was the first one. I mean, this is back in like 2016. And so, I covered everything from fitness to nutrition to biohacking to astrology startups, you kind of name it. And yes, my book goes into sort of, I would say, the changes I saw in the industry over time, and some hopeful and some more troubling. At this point, I write for several different outlets, from Wall Street Journal to New York Times, the LA Times, and I cover more than just the business perspective now. I cover more of the cultural and sociological aspects. So more and more, I'm trying to answer the question of why is everyone obsessed with a certain trend? Why do certain things take off? And why are so many people turning to wellness?
Mm-hmm. That's great. Well, I started off as an active lifestyle and wellness banker back in 2013. And some of my partners at the firm I work for said, is that like a full-time job? Like, can you work on some other industry at the same time? I'm like, look, I think I know what's around the corner here, so just trust me. And then I left and started on my own firm, so I never convinced them.
What's funny is that, before I covered wellness, I covered fashion and beauty. I used to work at the Today Show, and everyone who used to pitch me fashion brands or lipsticks now is pitching me kombucha brands or fitness regimens. It became the industry du jour. So everyone who used to be a brand analyst or publicist for fashion basically all migrated over to wellness.
So let me ask you a question. As a journalist and as a reporter, when you write something, it comes with a certain level of credibility. Obviously, a lot of these products and services are not FDA approved. There's not necessarily white papers on them. So how do you get comfortable publishing something when it has your name on it and it's deemed that you actually researched it and almost like a stamp of approval?
Yeah, I'll say this. I think brands used to love me a lot more back when I started this reporting. I was a little less skeptical when I started reporting on the wellness industry. I make the comparison of the tech industry, where everyone had so much hope, 15 years ago on social media and the tech industry. Like, they really believed claims about how they were out there to change the world. And then over time, you start seeing problematic issues within the wellness industry. That happens to be a lot of pseudoscience or products lacking little, if any, scientific evidence. So right now, I would say I'm very, very particular about the brands or the trends that I report on. That being said, sometimes I can report on something that has emerging science and kind of give the reader a little bit of context about where we stand, how much we can trust certain claims. And listen, there are a bunch of brands that are doing good work, that are investing in research and clinical studies. So it's not like if the evidence isn't there, I won't report on it. But unfortunately, it is a bit limiting. Sometimes who I can report on. It really depends on the sector. Fitness is obviously very different than nutrition or whatnot.
Yeah, we invested in a company several years ago called Higher Dose on the infrared sauna and PMF mats, and we've seen some great results there. There are some clinical studies related to that, but it's also just, getting the toxins out of your body. And, getting into a infrared sauna is kind of like a rotisserie chicken, if you will. It's just getting into a steam room. So as you look at these emerging brands, are they coming to you? Are you going to them? How does it work from your standpoint, from like a sourcing?
Yeah, it varies. I have a newsletter called Well To Do where I sort of track and follow the latest in news and trends. So oftentimes I'm interested in a certain topic and I'll reach out to a brand, and oftentimes you learn something. I recently did a big investigation that took me 9 months for Bloomberg Business Week about the microbiome testing sector with an emphasis on a company called Viome. And I went to it with really, I would say, good expectations. And what I
Mm-hmm.
uncovered, I thought was very troubling. And so that's like a story where, I had good intentions. I really wanted to find out more about the sector. And in speaking to over a dozen microbiome specialists, not one could vouch for this company. So it's a toss-up sometimes.
Did you ever remember that company? I think it was in 2016, 17, called Juicero. That was,
Oh, yeah. That was
that had like
hilarious.
the guy would carry around like a 60-pound machine to do cold pressed juices, and then you could actually just do it with your hands. I think it was might have been Bloomberg actually that kind of called that company from 200 million of valuation, I think, back down to zero. What trends do you see as sustainable, and which ones do you see as maybe the top 1%? And you've obviously got a lot of wellness spas and medical spas out there. I don't think anyone's kind of cracked the code on it yet, and I'll comment on that. But what do you see as like the most effective right now and trending?
Yeah, so there are a few. I'd say number one, there's so much interest right now in the outdoor market, and from various different standpoints. So, number one, I just think more and more people want to be outside.
Mm-hmm.
So, you're seeing, the other subsectors related to it, and that could be sort of clothing, that could be events, it could be experiential. I don't think it's, you look at like what's happening around sort of, what I call alt tennis, like paddle and all these different sort of sports that are,
Pickleball, yeah.
yeah, pickleball, all that, but also the ski market. I mean, that's like an interesting fashion market that's really, really getting more investment and becoming more interesting. So I think there's so much to be done regarding the outdoor market. And it's funny, it's interesting seeing things that get a lot of buzz and a lot of hype, and then I'm always skeptical about whether they'll last. So
Mm-hmm.
it also sometimes depends within wellness of how long you want to kind of run that wave, how long it's going to last. So you could look at something like for example, I write a lot, and a lot of my book was based upon the fact that one of the most ignored pillars of wellness is social connection.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote a piece for the LA Times last year about all these different startups that are trying to get people more socially engaged. And it was a nuanced take. It was saying these are companies that I think do have good intentions, and they might be able to work in certain parameters and with certain groups. But overall, the idea of getting people to pay to socialize might be a tall order. But that is something that I think could use a little bit more innovation. I think people are hungry to be with other people. I've been tracking a lot what's happening in psychedelics, what's happening to the ketamine industry right now, the ketamine clinic industry. That was something that I was always skeptical about because it's an emerging field, it's an exciting field, but it's still an emerging field and the science isn't there just yet. And it's also really hard to get people to want to pay for that necessarily regularly, especially if it's not covered by insurance.
Yeah, I think that should probably be a bucket list item. But when I saw the first ketamine ad in a newspaper, I thought I was reading The Onion, that mock newsletter. It was like 20% off ketamine. I thought it was like a joke or something. I thought they only did that at raves, but then I realized it was actually part of the sector.
And then, I think there's more than just sort of a specific type of trend. I would say I'm more interested sometimes in how the market is shifting. I wrote a piece for the LA Times about how I felt that like the goopified products are kind of on their way out, and another piece for the New York Times about how science washing is really kind of taking off within the wellness industry, particularly because consumers are demanding scientific evidence, and so I just think every brand now has to prove to their user, to their consumer, that it's worth their buy. I always make the joke that at this point, people have a cabinet that's filled to the brim with CBD stuff that doesn't work. And now they're just a little bit more skeptical, a little bit more hesitant before going all in on the next trend. So I really think it's worthwhile for brands to take that seriously. I think, there's one study that found that 67% of adult consumers now report a growing mistrust of brands. And there's a big target right now on wellness. And so I think you have to work extra hard to prove that your product is going to work, that the efficacy is there.
The one thing that I feel like nobody's cracked the code yet or actually put in the work is the sequencing of the services. So if I'm going in, if I do Soul Cycle, let's say like 4 days a week, how many days should I do a Normatec? Do I do a Normatec, lymphatic drainage and compression boots? And then should I do a infrared sauna? And then should I do a cold plunge? I feel like nobody's set up like the candy land, if you will, of, what services kind of fit and in what sequence you do them. And nobody's giving someone like a routine or a prescription. They're selling these memberships at like Restore or some of the other brands that have come out and try to do these medical wellness or, I feel like it's more of like a warehouse of biohacking than like a prescription for optimization. I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of skeptical about a lot of these treatments just until the science really catches up with it. So I think a lot of these places are even just trying to focus on getting the scientific evidence just for the treatments alone. Whether or not you put that into an encompassing sort of, regimen or program, I think is a little difficult. And also people have limited amounts of time. I know people that belong to a lot of these places like Remedy Place or whatever it is. And if you only have a certain amount of time, you're going to prioritize whatever it is you want to prioritize, whether that's recovery or whether that's fitness, so I think it's a little difficult.
When you take a look at part of your book that really struck me because we're working on a project right now, when you say gym as church, can you kind of go over that? Just as to preamble on that is we're working with a group down in Tampa who wants to basically do the Soul Cycle with Christian music, and which 90 million people listen to, and instructors that are doing some iterations of prayer and some scripture. And we did a focus group, and I'm not part of that religion, but it hit me pretty hard. So talk about what you found and why that became a chapter in the book.
Yeah. So in the book, I really am discussing people who say it in a sort of tongue-in-cheek way, as in, my gym is my church, and they're going there because it offers them community, it offers them identity, purpose, kind of all the things you used to find in your local church or synagogue. But it's still secular. Now, that's kind of different than what I've been recently reporting on. I did a piece for the New York Times about how the religious communities are actually trying to infuse or kind of bridge gym and church, quite literally. I mean, one sector that's really taking off right now are sort of religious fitness consultants. Well, they will basically implement an entire program in your church, synagogue, whatever it is, to draw in wellness fans. And people might scoff at that, but in interviewing people across the country, I was surprised at how many, well, specifically women will say, I don't have a lot of time. The weekend is very important to me. So that stretch of time on a Sunday or Saturday morning, I'm not going to be sitting in a pew. I'm not going to be sitting in synagogue. I want to be on a hike. I want to be in a fitness regimen. So kind of combining the two together. I mean, and this is in addition to, let's say, nutrition programs, meditation programs. I mean, I wrote about how even the Pope is getting in on wellness. Like so I'm just dividing those two things because there's a secular aspect to it. And then there is a more actual, literal, religious view of this.
So if you were to pull that forward, do you think the private sector ends up, providing programming and partnering with, a large church or a synagogue? Or do you think that these entities on their own end up like hiring program directors and try and piecemeal it themselves?
I did speak to some programming consultants who are doing very, very well. They're being hired by these religious institutions. But oftentimes, I also see a lot of religious institutions just have someone who happens to be a huge fitness enthusiast who says, I would love to implement this program myself. I got my fitness training.
Right.
Or in certain other cases, it could be startups that are more geared towards religious people. So, meditation programs that are for Christians or whatnot. So I don't necessarily know that there's going to be such a partnership between the two. And also, when you talk about like SoulCycle and those type of, I would say fitness studios that are, kind of tongue in cheek calling themselves church, it really is just more of a community draw. And it's kind of one of the issues I had with their marketing. They call themselves, your tribe, your community, your church. And to which I say, well, good luck telling your SoulCycle that you lost your job. Can I still come? I mean, you told me I'm your tribe. You're my community. Like, good luck. I'm not saying that organized religion is perfect, but they have had centuries to perfect their systems, and they're much more capable of helping people who've fallen on hard times.
Yeah. Do you see just given the price of being a living a Halo lifestyle or living a wellness lifestyle? There's definitely an income divide that is widening. How do you think we solve that? Is there some kind of give back? Is there a lot of people do these demographic studies about where to put their locations, right? It's all based on demographics and all based on household income. That's discriminatory in and of itself, right? So how do you see any kind of either government movement? Do you see people saying, hey, we've got to get the rest of the population in here, not just the top 5 or 10%?
Yeah, there have been experiments with local governments trying to launch their own initiatives, trying to get people outside, trying to get people to do fitness programs. I will say more than just the cost issue is a time issue. You can literally put a SoulCycle in the middle of town and offer people free classes. But if they're working 2 jobs and they're barely able to put dinner on the table because they are so consumed and so overwhelmed, they won't have time to go. So that's one issue. And it's also cultural. I went to Alabama a few years ago, and I remember I just went around a small town asking people what their wellness regimen was like. And they laughed at me. They were like, we hate that word. We're never going to use that word. They were like, I go hunting with my friends. My wellness looks like hanging out with my family and drinking a beer on Sunday. We don't specifically need the way, let's say, coastal cities or upper middle income communities define wellness, which feels very rigid to them.
Interesting. Yeah, when I go into certain airports, I'm shocked at the amount of people that are getting on a plane, using a wheelchair, and for no other reason except for obesity or seatbelt extender. I feel like we've let that proliferate. I'm not saying it should be a tax on people for that, but I feel like it's troubling that we can't get people to take better care of themselves.
I think it's very hard for certain groups. I think that for some, they just, like I said, just don't have the time to necessarily take care of themselves. And they may not have the same education about health pursuits as others. And like I said, it just might look very different to them. I think you can look at coastal cities and see an almost fetishization of health. This obsession with, I have to take a fitness class, I have to drink my kombucha, and you go to different places. And like I said, they're like, I go on hunting expeditions. I go hiking with my friends. I do a whole bunch of other stuff. I go swimming in the local lake. It doesn't necessarily have to look like a fitness class. Well, I just had a baby a few months ago.
Congratulations, Mazel Tov. That's a good use of your time. We should just end the podcast right there and say, I'm focused on my baby. We're good.
And listen, I have to say, I'm one of those people now who really struggles to find the time. I used to be someone who, made sure I got 45 minutes of exercise every day. I always made myself a salad for lunch. And now it really is something that I'm struggling with. And so I am particularly interested in solutions for the time strapped. That is something that I am looking into. I'm very interested in companies that are solving for that particular problem. Yeah, that's me personally.
Gotcha. What trade shows do you usually attend, or where do you if you're looking to stay on top of it, besides the well-to-do, newsletter that you put out. Tell us, give us a little secrets into how you educate yourself on a daily basis on what's going on.
Well, I don't go to as many trade shows. I think potentially because I get pitched so many different items and so many different companies, I feel like they land inside my inbox.
Yep.
I will say that I go to several different conferences. So I like the health conference, the health tech conference. I was in Vegas. I'm going to South by Southwest to speak on a panel for their health and wellness division. There are various ones that I like. I go to CSI Con, which is a skeptic conference. I don't know if your crowd's going to appreciate that.
I don't know that one. Okay.
But, I'm a journalist. I don't know if people have been following what's going on in the journalism industry. There's not a lot of money to attend events. So a lot of times it comes out of my own pocket. So I really can only prioritize very certain conferences or ones that I'm invited to speak to or do panels on, but there's just no money in journalism now to send people to trade shows. I wish there was. I would show up.
Gotcha. And the last question here, and we're mostly doing things on the finance side, on mergers and acquisitions. Are there companies that you see as potentially the next big thing, but they're struggling to get capital, whether it's the founders have never done it before, or maybe the product or the service just hasn't picked up yet, whether it's like Cold Plunge 5 years ago wasn't really a business. Now it's a big business. Infrared saunas, the Theraguns and those types of things. Are there certain things that you see on the horizon?
Yeah, I think there are certain elements regarding women's health. And maybe I'm a bit biased because it's something I'm interested in now, specifically parenting. But I did a piece recently on the pelvic health sector that's really, really taking off. And that's something that's, technically you would think medical, but it really is more of a wellness offering because oftentimes it wasn't really covered by insurance. But that is something that's really, really taking off. There isn't enough, I would say. The demand is so high right now that basically all these different operators and clinics can't keep up with it. So you look at companies like Hinge Health that are growing rapidly. And I mean, both in-person clinic, but also virtual sessions that are doing very, very well. So I think there's a lot within women's health that has yet to be tapped that I think is going to go gangbusters over the next few years.
It's great. Well, thanks for coming on. Appreciate you coming on, and congrats on the baby.
Glad to chat with you. And if anyone listening has a really interesting story, company, do reach out. Always happy to meet new companies.
That's awesome. Well, we'll see you in person. We will get you using our Halo term when you can on the side. And we'll put up all the show notes on the newsletter and the book. So thanks for waving the flag here and getting people aware of new products and services to take better care of themselves. And people like you are the ones that matter. So keep doing it while you raise your child.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care.